George Strait sees siblings asking for food in the airport parking lot and moves everyone with his action. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Nashville, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Sofia Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she prepared breakfast for her 3 children, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. At 32 years old, she looked older than her years, the weight of responsibility etched in the lines around her eyes and the permanent furrow in her brow. "Miguel, wake up your sister," she called softly to her 10-year-old son, who was already awake, sitting on the edge of the couch that served as his bed. The boy had inherited his mother's dark eyes and determined chin, but there was something ancient in his gaze, a premature understanding of hardship that no child should possess. Miguel gently shook his 7-year-old sister Anna, who stirred reluctantly. The little girl clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit, its once white fur now gray. From countless nights of comfort, in the corner of the room, baby Lucas slept peacefully in a second-hand crib, his 6-month-old face serene and unaware of the struggles surrounding him. Sophia had been awake since 3 in the morning, returning from her overnight shift at the hospital cafeteria. In 4 hours, she would need to leave for her second job cleaning offices downtown, and by evening, she would be serving tables at a small diner until midnight. 3 jobs, barely enough to cover rent, utilities, and formula for Lucas, the mathematics of survival that consumed her every waking moment. As she poured watered-down cereal into 3 bowls, Sophia's mind drifted to the music playing softly. On the old radio perched on the kitchen counter, George Strait's voice filled the small space with Amarillo by Morning, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to escape into the melody. His music had been her companion through the darkest times, especially after her husband Roberto had walked out 6 months ago, leaving nothing but empty promises and unpaid bills. She remembered how Roberto used to complain about her obsession with country music, rolling his eyes whenever she hummed along to George Strait songs while cooking or cleaning. But those melodies carried her through 18-hour workdays and sleepless nights with a crying baby. They reminded her of her grandmother's stories about resilience, about finding hope in the smallest moments. If you're listening to this story from your home, your car, or wherever life has taken you today, I want you to know that you're part of something special. Please subscribe to our channel and share in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like Sophia's remind us that we're all connected by our struggles and our dreams. Your support helps us bring these incredible tales of human resilience to light. "Mama, are you okay?" Miguel's voice brought her back to reality. The boy was studying her face with the intensity of someone far beyond his years, and Sophia realized. She had been standing motionless, lost in thought. "Yes, mijo, just tired," she replied, forcing a smile as she handed him his bowl. "Remember, if anything happens while I'm at work, you take care of Anna and Lucas. You're the man of the house now." Miguel nodded solemnly, accepting the weight of responsibility that should never rest on such young shoulders. He had learned to change diapers, prepare simple meals, and comfort his sister when nightmares woke her. At 10 years old, he possessed a maturity that both impressed and broke Sophia's heart. Ina climbed onto her chair, her legs swinging as she ate her breakfast in silence. She rarely spoke anymore, not since their father left. The little girl who once chatted constantly about princesses and fairy tales now observed the world with quiet, thoughtful eyes, as if she understood that childhood was a luxury they could no longer afford. Sophia glanced at the calendar tacked to the refrigerator, its pages marked with shift schedules, bill due dates, and doctor appointments for Lucas. Today was particularly challenging. She had promised her supervisor at the cleaning company that she would work a double shift to cover for a sick colleague. The extra money would help, but it meant 16 hours away from her children. Miguel, there's formula in the cabinet for Lucas, and some crackers for you and Anna if you get hungry, she instructed, gathering her worn purse and the jacket that had seen better days. I'll try to call during my break, but remember, if there's an emergency, you have Mrs. Patterson's number. Their elderly neighbor had been kind enough to check on the children occasionally, though Sophia hated imposing on the woman's generosity. Independence had always been her strength, but lately she felt that foundation crumbling beneath the relentless pressure of single motherhood. As she prepared to leave, Sophia caught her reflection in the small mirror by the door. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once vibrant smile had become a rare occurrence. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her, the same woman who had once dreamed of attending nursing school, who had believed that hard work would eventually lead to better opportunities. The morning commute to her first job was a 40-minute bus ride through Nashville's awakening streets. Sophia pressed her face against the window, watching well-dressed professionals hurrying to their offices, wondering what it would feel like to have a single, stable job that paid enough to support her family. She imagined coming home at a reasonable hour, helping Miguel with homework, reading bedtime stories to Anna, and rocking Lucas to sleep without the crushing anxiety of unpaid bills weighing on her chest. At the office building where she worked, as a cleaning supervisor, Sophia threw herself into her tasks with the same dedication she brought to everything in her life. Mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and sanitizing bathrooms, work that others might consider menial, but which she approached with dignity and thoroughness. Every dollar earned was a step closer to stability, every completed shift a small victory in her ongoing battle against poverty. But as the hours stretched on, Sophia felt an unusual heaviness in her chest. The exhaustion that had become her constant companion seemed deeper today, more persistent. She had been running on adrenaline and determination for months, pushing her body beyond its limits, ignoring the warning signs that whispered of impending collapse. During her brief lunch break, she called home to check on the children. Miguel's voice was steady and reassuring as he reported that Anna was playing quietly and Lucas had napped peacefully. But Sophia could hear the underlying tension in her son's words, the careful way he spoke that revealed how much he worried about her, how much responsibility he felt for keeping their fragile world together. "I love you, mijo," she whispered into the phone, her voice thick with emotion. "Tell Anna and Lucas that Mama loves them too." "We love you too, Mama," Miguel replied, and Sophia could hear Anna's voice in the background, adding her own declaration of love. Those words carried her through the afternoon, through the physical demands of her work and the mental exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. As evening approached and Sophia prepared to transition to her third job of the day, she felt the room beginning to spin slightly. She gripped the edge of a desk, telling herself it was just hunger, just fatigue, just another challenge to overcome. She had survived her husband's abandonment, had kept her children fed and housed despite impossible odds. She could certainly handle one more shift, but as she reached for her jacket, the world tilted dangerously, and Sophia's last conscious thought was of her 3 children waiting at home, counting on her to return safely with enough money to keep their small family afloat for another day. The sound of Sophia's body hitting the floor echoed through the empty office building, but by then she was already unconscious, her phone buzzing with an unanswered call from Miguel, who had been trying to tell her that Lucas had developed a slight fever. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, called by a concerned night security guard who had found her. As the paramedics worked to stabilize her, Sophia's purse lay open beside her, revealing a crumpled photograph of her 3 children and a worn concert ticket from a George Strait show she had attended years ago, back when dreams still seemed possible. Miguel stood by the window of their apartment, holding Lucas, while Anna clung to his free arm. The baby's fever had broken, but something else was terribly wrong. Their mother should have called by now. She always called. as darkness settled over. Nashville, the 10-year-old boy who had been forced to grow up too fast, began to understand that their already fragile world was about to shatter completely. What he didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, their desperate search for help would lead them to a chance encounter that would change everything. Hours passed, and when the hospital finally contacted Mrs. Patterson with news of Sophia's collapse, Miguel made a decision that would have terrified his mother. Rather than wait for social services to potentially separate them, he gathered what little food they had, wrapped Lucas in his warmest blanket, and took Anna's hand. "We're going to find help," he told his sister, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his young body. "We're going to stay together no matter what." Sesame 2. The Nashville International Airport buzzed with its usual morning activity as travelers hurried through the terminals, dragging suitcases and checking phones, each person absorbed in their own urgent destinations. Outside, in the sprawling parking garage, the December air carried a sharp chill that cut through thin clothing and reminded everyone that winter had settled firmly over Tennessee. Miguel Martinez walked slowly between the rows of cars, his 7-year-old sister, Inna, pressed close to his side, while he carefully balanced his 6-month-old brother Lucas in his other arm. They had been walking for what felt like hours, though it had only been 45 minutes since they had taken the bus from their neighborhood to the airport. Miguel had remembered his mother mentioning that airports were places where people from all over the world came and went, places where generous travelers might help children in need. The cardboard sign he carried, hastily made from a box they had found in the apartment complex dumpster, bore the simple message, written in his careful 10-year-old handwriting, "Please help us get food for our baby brother." The words seemed inadequate to express their desperation, but Miguel hoped that people would see past the crude lettering to the genuine need in their eyes. Anna hadn't spoken since they left the apartment early that morning. She walked with the mechanical steps of someone in shock, her stuffed rabbit tucked securely under her arm, her dark eyes wide and frightened. Every few minutes she would look up at Miguel with an expression that asked questions he couldn't answer. "Where is Mama? When is she coming back? What will happen to us?" Lucas, mercifully, had slept through most of their journey, though Miguel could feel the baby's diaper was wet and knew that their small supply of formula wouldn't last much longer. The weight of his baby brother in his arms was nothing compared to the weight of responsibility crushing down on his thin shoulders. At 10 years old, he had become the head of a household, a protector, a provider, and the pressure was overwhelming. The first few travelers they approached had walked past without acknowledgement, their eyes focused on their phones or their watches, too busy to notice 3 children who clearly didn't belong in this place of constant motion and purpose. Miguel tried to position himself near the exits where people came out, thinking that those who had just arrived might be in better spirits, more willing to help. "Excuse me, sir," Miguel said politely to a well-dressed businessman pulling a wheeled suitcase. The man glanced down, his expression immediately shifting to annoyance, and he quickened his pace without a word. The rejection stung, but Miguel had learned not to take such responses personally. He knew that not everyone could help, and he couldn't afford to become discouraged. An elderly woman emerging from a taxi looked at them with sympathy, reaching into her purse and pulling out a $5 bill. "God bless you, children," she said softly, pressing the money into Miguel's free hand. "I hope things get better for you." Her kindness brought tears to his eyes, but he managed to thank her before she disappeared into the terminal. $5 wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe enough for a small container of formula, or some crackers for Anna, who had eaten nothing since the previous evening. Miguel carefully folded the bill and tucked it into his jacket pocket, next to the piece of paper with Mrs. Patterson's phone number that he was saving as a last resort. As the morning progressed, their luck remained mixed. A young couple gave them leftover sandwiches from their trip, and a family with children donated a small bottle of water and some crackers. But for every act of kindness, there were a dozen people who walked past as if the children were invisible, and a few who made comments that cut deeper than indifference. "Look at those kids," Miguel heard a woman say to her companion. "Where are their parents? Someone should call security." The words made his stomach clench with fear. Security meant authorities, and authorities meant separation. He had heard stories from other kids in their neighborhood about what happened. When social services got involved, brothers and sisters split up, sent to different foster homes, sometimes never seeing each other again. "We should move," he whispered to Anna, guiding her toward a different section of the parking area. But as they walked, Miguel noticed a security guard observing them from near the terminal entrance. The man was heavy-set, with a stern expression, and the way he watched them made Miguel's skin crawl with anxiety. Sure enough, within minutes, the guard approached them with aggressive strides. His name tag read Officer Bradley, and everything about his demeanor suggested he viewed the children as a problem to be solved rather than human beings in need. "Hey, you kids," he called out harshly. "What are you doing out here? Where are your parents?" His voice carried across the parking area, drawing unwanted attention from passing travelers. Miguel straightened his shoulders, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "We're waiting for our ride, sir," he said politely, hoping the lie would be enough to send the guard away. "Waiting for your ride?" Officer Bradley's tone was skeptical and condescending. "With that sign, you kids are panhandling, and that's not allowed here. This is private property, and I have every right to have you arrested for trespassing." The word "arrested" sent a shock of terror through Miguel's body. He instinctively pulled Anna closer and adjusted his grip on Lucas, who had begun to stir restlessly in his arms. "We're not causing any trouble, sir. We're just trying to get some food for our baby brother." "I don't care what sob story you've got," Bradley snapped, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. "You're disturbing our paying customers, and I want you gone. Now, before I call the police and have them sort this out." Several travelers had stopped to watch the confrontation, and Miguel felt the burn of shame and humiliation as whispers and stares surrounded them. Some people pulled out their phones, though whether to call for help or simply to record the scene, he couldn't tell. "Please, sir," Miguel said, his voice beginning to crack despite his efforts to remain strong. "Our mum is in the hospital and we don't have anywhere else to go. We're not trying to cause problems. We just need a little help." "Hospital, my foot," Bradley scoffed, his face reddening with anger or exertion. "You think I haven't heard every sob story in the book? Kids like you are always making up excuses. Your parents probably sent you out here to work the crowd while they sit at home collecting welfare." The cruel words hit Miguel like physical blows. The unfairness of it all, the assumption that they were somehow less worthy of compassion because of their circumstances, made his eyes burn with angry tears. But he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that any emotional outburst would only make things worse. Anna had begun to cry silently, the tears streaming down her face as she pressed closer to her brother. Lucas, sensing the tension around him, started to fuss and whimper, his small voice adding to the chaos of the moment. The security guard seemed to take perverse satisfaction in their distress, as if proving his point about troublesome children. "I'm giving you 30 seconds to get off this property," Bradley declared, pointing toward the exit. "After that, I'm calling backup, and you'll be spending the day in juvenile detention while we figure out what to do with you." Miguel's mind raced desperately. They could run, but where would they go? Back to their empty apartment where social services might already be waiting, to Mrs. Patterson, who was kind but elderly and couldn't possibly take care of 3 children. The options seemed to narrow with each passing second, And for the first time since this nightmare began, Miguel felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. The question was asked quietly, almost conversationally, but something in the tone made everyone in the immediate area turn to look. Standing a few feet away, having approached unnoticed during the confrontation, was a tall man in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his face shadowed by a well-worn cowboy hat. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to respect, and his presence seemed to immediately change the dynamics of the situation. Season 3, Officer Bradley turned toward the newcomer, his aggressive posture faltering slightly as he tried to assess whether this person represented authority or simply another curious bystander. "Nothing I can't handle, sir," he replied, though his tone had lost some of its earlier venom. "Just some kids causing trouble, panhandling from our customers." The man under the cowboy hat stepped closer, and Miguel felt something stir in his memory. There was something familiar about the stranger's voice, something that made his heart skip in recognition, even as his mind struggled to process the impossibility of what he was seeing. This couldn't be who he thought it was. Not here, not now, not when everything in his world was falling apart. "Causing trouble," the man repeated, his voice carrying a gentle drawl that seemed to wrap around the words like warm honey. "They look like children who need help to me." He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to Miguel's eye level, and when he tipped his hat back, there was no longer any doubt about his identity. It was George Strait, the king of country music himself, the voice that had serenaded Miguel's mother through countless lonely nights, the artist whose music had become the soundtrack to their family's struggles and dreams. Miguel's mouth opened slightly in shock, but no words came out. He clutched Lucas tighter, wondering if exhaustion and fear had finally driven him to hallucination. George's eyes met Miguel's, and the boy saw something there that he hadn't encountered. In hours of approaching strangers, compassion that seemed to reach directly into his soul. "What's your name, son?" George asked softly, ignoring the security guard who was beginning to shift uncomfortably nearby. "Miguel," the boy managed to whisper, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the airport. "Miguel Martinez." "And who do you have with you, Miguel?" "My sister Anna and my baby brother Lucas." Miguel's voice grew stronger as he spoke. Their names, as if the act of introduction somehow validated their existence, their right to be treated with dignity. George straightened up and turned his attention to Officer Bradley, and Miguel watched in amazement as the security guard's demeanor underwent a dramatic transformation. Recognition dawned on Bradley's face, followed quickly by embarrassment and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "Mr. Strait," Bradley stammered, his earlier aggression evaporating like morning mist. "I didn't realize. I was just doing my job, sir. These kids were bothering customers, and airport policy clearly states—" "Airport policy," George interrupted quietly, "also states that all visitors should be treated with respect and dignity, doesn't it?" His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the politeness that made Bradley take a step backward. George turned back to Miguel, effectively dismissing the security guard. "Miguel, when was the last time you and your sister and your brother had something to eat?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, broke down the last of Miguel's carefully constructed barriers. Tears began to flow down his cheeks as he tried to answer, his voice catching on the words. "Yesterday morning, sir. We had some cereal, but we gave most of it to Anna because she's little. And where are your parents?" The story came tumbling out of Miguel in broken sentences interrupted by sobs. He told George about his father leaving, about his mother working 3 jobs, about her collapse at work and the hospital, about their fear of being separated by social services. Anna, who had been silent throughout the ordeal with the security guard, suddenly found her voice and added details about how their mama sang George Strait songs while she cooked, how she said his music gave her strength to keep going. As Miguel spoke, a small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the presence of the famous singer and the obviously emotional scene unfolding. George seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on the three children in front of him. When Miguel finished his story, George was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with controlled emotion. "Officer Bradley," George said finally, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of commanding stadium crowds. "I think you owe these children an apology." Bradley's face flushed red. "Mr. Strait, I was just following protocol." "We can't have people panhandling on airport property and these kids—" "These kids," George interrupted, his voice rising slightly, "are not panhandlers. They're three human beings in crisis, and instead of showing them compassion, you chose to humiliate them in public. You made assumptions about their character based on their appearance and their circumstances, and you treated them with cruelty when they needed kindness most." The crowd around them had grown larger, and Miguel could see people recording the exchange with their phones. Bradley was clearly aware of the audience as well, and his discomfort was obvious. "Now," George continued, "you're going to apologize to Miguel, Anna, and Lucas for your behavior, and then you're going to help me make sure they get the assistance they need." Bradley's apology was mumbled and obviously reluctant, but George accepted it with a nod. "Miguel," he said, turning back to the boy, "would you and your sister and brother like to get some food? And maybe we can figure out how to help your mama." "Two," Miguel nodded, not trusting his voice to work properly. The surreal nature of the situation, the presence of his mother's favorite singer, the kindness after hours of rejection and humiliation, all combined to leave him feeling emotionally overwhelmed. George placed a gentle hand on Miguel's shoulder and began walking with them toward the terminal, the crowd parting respectfully as they moved. "You know," he said conversationally, "I grew up on a farm in Texas, and my daddy always told me that you can judge a person's character by how they treat those who can't do anything for them in return. You've been taking care of your sister and your baby brother, keeping your family together under impossible circumstances. That takes more courage and character than most adults ever show." As they entered the airport restaurant, George asked the hostess for a private table in the back, away from the curious stares of other diners. He helped Miguel get Anna settled in a chair and showed him how to position Lucas so the baby would be comfortable. Then he sat down across from them and picked up a menu. "Order whatever you want," he told them, "and don't worry about the cost. We're going to take care of everything." While they waited for their food, George made several phone calls. Miguel couldn't hear all the conversations, but he caught fragments that filled him with hope. Calls to the hospital where their mother was being treated, calls to someone about legal assistance, calls about temporary housing and social services. When their meals arrived, Miguel and Anna ate with the desperate hunger of children who had been deprived too long. George watched them with a mixture of sadness and determination, occasionally asking gentle questions about their mother, their school, their dreams for the future. "Your mama sounds like an incredible woman," George said as Miguel described. "Sophia's work ethic and her love for country music. 3 jobs to take care of you kids, never giving up even when things got tough. That's the kind of strength my songs try to celebrate. She says your music helps her keep going," Anna said shyly, speaking for the first time since they had sat down. "She sings Amarillo by morning when she's sad." George's eyes softened. "That's one of my favorites too. Maybe when your mama gets better, you can bring her to one of my shows." But even as he made that gentle promise, George was formulating a much more comprehensive plan. The chance encounter in the parking lot had awakened something in him, a sense of purpose that went beyond the immediate crisis. These children, this family, had touched a part of his heart that had been carefully guarded since the loss of his own daughter years earlier. As Miguel finished his meal and Lucas dozed contentedly in his arms, George made one final phone call. This conversation was longer and more intense than the others, and when he hung up, his expression was one of quiet satisfaction. "Miguel," he said, "I've got some good news about your mama. She's going to be fine. The doctors say she collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration, but with some rest and proper nutrition, she'll make a full recovery. I've arranged for her to get the best care possible, and I've also set up some other things that I think will help your family." The relief that washed over Miguel was so intense it left him feeling dizzy. His mama was going to be okay. They weren't going to be separated. Somehow, miraculously, everything was going to work out. But as he looked at George, Strait sitting across from him, Miguel realized that this was just the beginning of something much larger than a simple rescue. Season 4. 2 hours later, George's black SUV pulled up to the entrance of Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and Miguel felt his heart racing with anticipation. Through the tinted windows, he could see the bustling activity of one of Nashville's premier hospitals, and somewhere inside those walls was his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep their family together. "Before we go in," George said, turning in his seat to face the 3 children, "I want to prepare you for what you're going to see. Your mama is going to look tired, and she might have some tubes and wires connected to her, but that's just to help her get better faster. The important thing is that she's safe, and she's going to recover completely." Anna gripped her stuffed rabbit tighter, her dark eyes wide with worry. "Will Mama be happy to see us?" she asked in a small voice. George's expression softened. "Sweetheart, seeing you 3 is going to be the best medicine your mama could possibly receive. She's been worried sick about you, wondering if you're safe and taken care of. When she sees that you're here and you're okay, it's going to heal something in her heart that no doctor could fix." The hospital lobby was a maze of activity, but George navigated it with the confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized, yet wanting to maintain privacy. He had called ahead, arranging for a private room and ensuring that Sophia would receive the kind of care typically reserved for VIP patients, though he had been careful not to make a show of his involvement. Dr. Sarah Chen, Sophia's attending physician, met them at the elevator. She was a petite woman with kind eyes and a manner that immediately put the children at ease. "Your mother is doing much better," she told Miguel. "The IV fluids have helped with the dehydration, and we've been able to give her some medication to help her rest. What she really needs now is time to recover and the knowledge that her children are safe." As they walked down the hospital corridor, George found himself thinking about his own family, about the daughter he had lost, and the way that tragedy had shaped his understanding of how precious and fragile family bonds could be. Seeing Miguel's determination to protect his siblings, watching Anna's quiet bravery, holding baby Lucas, who trusted so completely in his brother's care, all of it resonated with emotions he had spent years learning to manage. When they reached Sophia's room, Miguel hesitated at the doorway. Through the partially open door, he could see his mother lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than he had ever seen her. Her dark hair was spread across the white pillow, and there were indeed tubes connected to her arm, just as George had warned them. "Go ahead, son," George encouraged gently. "She needs to see you." Miguel entered the room slowly, Anna close behind him, and approached the bed where their mother lay sleeping. "Mama?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sophia's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she seemed confused, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. But when her gaze focused on her children, her entire face transformed with relief and joy and overwhelming love. "Miguel, Anna, oh my babies," she cried, struggling to sit up despite the IV line in her arm. "I was so worried about you. I tried to call, but then everything went dark and I didn't know what happened to you and Lucas." Miguel carefully placed Lucas in his mother's arms, and the baby immediately snuggled against her, recognizing her scent and warmth. Anna climbed onto the bed and buried her face against Sophia's shoulder, finally allowing herself to cry with the abandon of a child who had been trying to be brave for too long. "We're okay, Mama," Miguel said, though his own voice was thick with emotion. "We stayed together, just like you taught us. And Mama, you're not going to believe what happened. You're not going to believe who helped us." Sophia looked up from her children and for the first time noticed George standing quietly in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his presence filling the room with a kind of calm strength. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating. That, the stress and medication had somehow conjured the image of her favorite singer. "You're George Strait," she said simply, her voice filled with wonder. "Yes, ma'am," George replied, stepping into the room. "And you're Sophia Martinez, the woman who raised 3 of the most courageous children I've ever had the privilege to meet." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as the impossibility of the situation began to sink in. "I don't understand. How did you find them? What happened?" Miguel launched into the story of their morning at the airport, describing their desperation, the encounter with the cruel security guard, and George's intervention. As he spoke, Sophia's expression moved through a range of emotions: relief, gratitude, embarrassment, and finally a kind of amazed disbelief. "Mr. Strait," she said when Miguel finished his account, "I don't know how to thank you. These children, they mean everything to me. The thought of what could have happened to them while I was here, unable to protect them—" "You don't need to thank me," George interrupted gently. "Any decent person would have done the same thing. But Sophia, I want to talk to you about more than just what happened today. I want to talk about your family's future." Over the next hour, as Sophia held her children close and listened in growing amazement, George outlined a plan that went far beyond emergency assistance. He had spent the afternoon making calls, pulling strings, and leveraging his influence and resources to create opportunities that could transform their lives permanently. "I've been in touch with the administrators at Nashville General Hospital," he explained. "They have an opening in their patient advocate program, working with families in crisis situations. It's a single position that would pay enough to support your family comfortably, with benefits including health insurance and childcare assistance. The hours are regular, Monday through Friday, so you'd be home with your children every evening." Sophia stared at him in disbelief. "But I don't have the qualifications for something like that. I never finished high school, and I don't have any formal training." "You have something more valuable than formal training," George replied. "You have lived experience. You understand what families in crisis are going through because you've been there yourself. And as for education, the hospital has agreed to provide tuition assistance if you want to pursue your GED or even nursing school eventually." "There's more," George continued, seeing the hope beginning to dawn in Sophia's eyes. "I've arranged for a scholarship fund that will cover educational expenses for all 3 of your children from elementary school through college. Miguel, Anna, and Lucas will never have to worry about the cost of their education." Miguel looked back and forth between his mother and George, hardly able to process what he was hearing. College had always seemed like an impossible dream, something for other families with money and stability. The idea that it might actually be within reach was almost too overwhelming to comprehend. "But why?" Sophia asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do all this for strangers? We're nobody special. We're just people trying to survive." George was quiet for a long moment, looking out the hospital window at the Nashville skyline. When he spoke again, His voice carried the weight of personal experience and hard-won wisdom. "Sophia, I lost my daughter Jennifer when she was 13 years old. Car accident. For the longest time after that, I struggled with questions about purpose, about why some people get chances and others don't, about what we're supposed to do with the blessings we receive in life." He turned back to face Sophia and her children, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Meeting your family today, seeing Miguel's courage and Anna's trust, and little Lucas's innocent faith that his brother would take care of him, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. We're all connected. The struggles we go through, the love we share, the way we take care of each other, that's what makes us human. Your children didn't just ask for handouts today. They faced rejection and humiliation with dignity. Miguel protected his siblings at the cost of his own pride. Anna stayed brave even when she was terrified. They showed me what real character looks like. And that's not something you can teach in school or buy with money." Sophia was crying openly now, holding her children as if she would never let them go. "I still don't understand how this is possible. Things like this don't happen to people like us. Maybe they should happen more often," George said softly. "Maybe those of us who have been blessed with success and resources need to do a better job of looking around and seeing who needs help. Your family taught me something important today about what really matters." As the afternoon wore on, the details of their new life began to take shape. George's assistant arrived with paperwork for the hospital job, temporary housing arrangements until Sophia was ready to return to work, and contact information for the various support services that would help ease their transition. Dr. Chen returned to check on Sophia's progress and declared that she would be ready for discharge the following morning, provided she committed to a week of rest and proper nutrition. "Your recovery has been remarkable," she told Sophia. "I think having your children here has been better medicine than anything we could prescribe." As evening approached and visiting hours began to wind down, George prepared to leave. But before he went, he had one more surprise for the family. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out an envelope and handed it to Miguel. "Open it," he said, with a smile. Inside were 4 tickets to George's upcoming concert at the Grand Ole Opry, with a handwritten note inviting the family to be his special guests backstage after the show. Miguel stared at the tickets in wonder, remembering all the times his mother had talked about dreaming of seeing George Strait perform live. "Mama," Miguel said, showing her the tickets, "you're going to get to meet George Strait properly." "I think I already have," Sophia replied, looking at the man who had transformed their lives in a single day. "Mr. Strait, I don't have words for what you've done for us. You've given us more than help, you've given us hope." George tipped his hat and headed for the door, but he paused at the threshold. "Sophia, Miguel, Anna, little Lucas, you've given me something too. You've reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place, why I started singing about real people and real families and the strength it takes to keep going when life gets hard. Thank you for that gift." As George disappeared down the hospital corridor, Sophia held her children close and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the miracle that had saved their family. But what none of them knew yet was that this was only the beginning of a relationship that would continue to bless and transform their lives for years to come. Saison 5. 7 years later, the backstage area of the Grand Ole Opry buzzed with the familiar energy that preceded one of George Strait's legendary performances. Musicians tuned their instruments, sound technicians made final adjustments, and the air thrummed with anticipation. But tonight was different from George's usual concerts. Tonight, he had a very special opening act. Miguel Martinez, now 17, years old and 6 feet tall, stood at the side of the stage holding his guitar, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The shy 10-year-old boy who had once begged for food in an airport parking lot had grown into a confident young man with his mother's determined eyes and a musical talent that had stunned everyone who heard him play. "You ready for this, son?" George asked, placing a reassuring hand on Miguel's shoulder. Over the years, their relationship had evolved into something that went beyond gratitude or charity. George had become a mentor, a father figure, and a friend to the entire Martinez family. "I think so," Miguel replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I keep thinking about that day at the airport, about how scared I was and how hopeless everything seemed. If someone had told me then that I'd be here tonight, opening for you at the Opry, I would have thought they were crazy." George smiled, remembering that desperate little boy who had carried his baby brother and protected his sister with such fierce determination. "You've earned this moment, Miguel. Every lesson, every hour of practice, every song you've written, it's all led to this. Your family story, your music, it's going to touch people tonight in ways you can't even imagine." In the audience, Sofia Martinez sat in the front row with Ana and Lucas, now 14 and 7 years old, respectively. Sofia looked radiant in a simple but elegant dress, her face glowing with pride and health. The exhausted, overwhelmed single mother who had collapsed from overwork was now a successful patient advocate at Nashville General Hospital, helping other families navigate crisis situations with the wisdom she had gained from her own struggles. Ina had grown into a bright, articulate teenager who excelled in her studies and had developed a passion for writing. She kept a journal where she documented not just her own experiences, but the stories of the many families her mother had helped. Over the years, her teacher said she had a gift for capturing human emotion and resilience in her words. Little Lucas, who had no memory of those desperate early days, was a happy second grader who loved school and had inherited both his brother's musical abilities and his mother's compassionate heart. He often accompanied Sofia to work during school breaks, charming patients and staff alike with his infectious smile and gentle nature. The transformation in their lives had been gradual but profound. Sofia's job at the hospital had provided not just financial stability, but a sense of purpose that fulfilled her in ways she had never imagined possible. She had completed her GED within 2 years and was now pursuing a nursing degree through the hospital's educational assistance program. The woman who had once worked 3 jobs just to pay rent now owned a modest but comfortable home in a safe neighborhood where her children could walk to school and play in the yard. But perhaps the most remarkable change had been in their relationship with George himself. What had begun as a rescue had evolved into a genuine friendship that enriched all their lives. George had become Uncle George to the children, a presence at birthday parties and school events, a source of guidance and support through the normal challenges of growing up. As the lights dimmed and the audience settled into expectant silence, Miguel took a deep breath and walked onto the Grand Ole Opry stage. The historic venue that had launched the careers of country music's greatest legends now welcomed a young man whose journey from desperation to hope embodied everything the genre celebrated about resilience and family bonds. "Good evening, Nashville," Miguel said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "My name is Miguel Martinez, and I want to tell you about the day my life changed forever." For the next 10 minutes, Miguel shared their story with the audience. He spoke about his mother's strength, about the fear and desperation that had driven 3 children to seek help from strangers, about the kindness of a man who could have easily walked past, but chose instead to stop and care. As he talked, Sofia wiped tears from her eyes, remembering not just the pain of those dark days, but the miracle of how far they had all traveled since then. "7 years ago, George Strait saved my family," Miguel continued. "But what he really did was show us that we were worth saving. He saw value in 3 scared kids when others saw only problems. He saw potential when we saw only obstacles. And tonight, I want to share with you the first song I ever wrote, inspired by that day and by the man who taught me that music has the power to heal hearts and change lives. Miguel positioned his guitar and began to play, his fingers moving confidently across the strings as he performed Angels in Parking Lots, a song that told their story with the kind of honest emotion that made country music so powerful. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word, and by the time he reached the final chorus, many people were crying openly. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous and sustained. Miguel stood on the stage, overwhelmed by the response, and looked out into the audience where his family sat beaming with pride. But the biggest surprise came when George himself walked onto the stage, joining Miguel for an impromptu duet of Amarillo by Morning, the song that had provided comfort to Sophia during her darkest hours. After their performance, George took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, Miguel Martinez represents everything I love about music and about life. He's talented, he's hardworking, and he's got a story that reminds us all why we're here. But more than that, he and his family have taught me that the greatest success isn't measured in album sales or awards. It's measured in the lives we touch and the love we share." The crowd erupted again, and Miguel felt a surge of emotion as he realized that this moment represented more than just a musical debut. It was the culmination of a journey that had begun with 3 desperate children and had led to a future filled with possibilities they had never dared to imagine. Later that evening, after the concert had ended and the last autograph had been signed, the Martinez family gathered with George in his dressing room. The atmosphere was relaxed and celebratory, filled with the easy affection of people who had been through something profound together. "Miguel, that was incredible," George said, pulling the young man into a hug. "The way you told the story, the emotion in your voice, the song itself, it was perfect. You're going to have an amazing career in music if that's what you choose." "It is what I choose," Miguel replied without hesitation. "But I want to use music the way you taught me, to tell stories about real people, about families who struggle and survive and find hope in unexpected places." Sophia looked around the room at her children, at George, who had become like family, at the life they had built from the ashes of their former desperation. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I think about that morning when I collapsed at work. How terrified I was that my children would be lost or hurt while I was unconscious. I never could have imagined that it would lead to all this." "Everything happens for a reason," George said gently. "Your family's strength, Miguel's courage that day, the music that brought us all together. It was all meant to be. And this is just the beginning." As they prepared to leave the Opry that night, George pulled Sophia aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know something," he said seriously. "What happened 7 years ago, it changed my life too. Meeting your family, seeing the kind of love and determination you all showed, it reminded me why I started making music in the first place. You gave me back my sense of purpose." "George," Sophia replied, her voice thick with emotion, "you saved us, not just from hunger or homelessness, but from despair. You showed us that we mattered, that our struggles weren't invisible, that there was still goodness in the world. How do you thank someone for giving you back your faith in humanity?" "You don't need to thank me," George said, echoing the words he'd spoken in the hospital 7 years earlier. "You've already given me more than I could ever give you. Your family's story, Miguel's music, the way you've all grown and thrived, that's the greatest gift anyone could receive." As they walked out into the Nashville night, Sophia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From 3 desperate children in an airport parking lot to a family thriving with love, stability, and hope for the future. From a broken single mother to a successful professional helping other families find their way through crisis. From a scared little boy to a young man with the talent and platform to inspire others with his music. The story that had begun with desperation had become one of transformation, proving that sometimes the most unlikely encounters can reshape entire destinies. And as Miguel looked up at the stars above Nashville, he knew that this was only the beginning of a life dedicated to using his music to spread the same kind of hope and compassion that had once saved his family. Years later, when Miguel Martinez became a country music star in his own right, he would never end a concert without telling the story of the day George Strait found 3 children in a parking lot and changed their lives forever. Because some stories are too important to keep to ourselves, and some miracles are meant to be shared with the world.